Welcome to the Smart and Soulful Money Podcast. I'm your host, Carrie B. Van Winkle. I'm a socially responsive investment advisor with Natural Investments, and a warm welcome to you. Today, I'm talking with Ann McKune. She's the Director of Philanthropy at the Community Foundation of Louisville. In this position, she works with individuals, families, and business leaders who are interested in being more intentional in their grant making. From helping an individual craft a personalized philanthropic plan to working with corporations to develop custom employee giving campaigns, Ann is dedicated to partnering with the foundation's donors to create greater impact in community. Ann has over 12 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, where her work has taken her across the globe, from Quito, Ecuador to Tenut, Niger. Is it Tenut? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, good job.
She holds a BA in French and International Studies from the University of Richmond and a master's degree from UNC Chapel Hill's School of Social Work, where her work focused on community and organizational development. Welcome to the podcast, Ann.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. So I really wanted to talk with Ann because she is the Director of Philanthropy at our local Community Foundation here in Louisville, Kentucky, and has done some great work helping people get more clear about their values and then creating a guide from those values, creating a mission statement, if you will, or a guiding statement to help them know how to best direct their giving, their philanthropic efforts. Not everybody has to do this, but she's got some great experience with those donors who are very interested in approaching it that way. So, Ann, with that, tell us a little bit more about your work at the Community Foundation of Louisville.
Sure. Well, thank you again for the opportunity. If it's okay, I'm going to take just a minute to tell a little bit about the Community Foundation broadly, in case there are some folks that aren't familiar with community foundations. So the Community Foundation of Louisville is the largest charitable foundation in Kentucky. We operate a little bit like a charitable bank. Donors establish funds at the foundation, and they make tax-deductible gifts into those funds. The donor or an assigned advisory committee can then recommend grants from the funds. Some examples of funds that we have are donor-advised funds, scholarship funds, endowment funds. We have just over $550 million under management, and that is made up of over 1,600 different charitable funds. Each of those funds has a specific charitable purpose established by the donor. And last year we granted about $55 million into the community, into the broad community, most of which stayed here in the greater Louisville area. So we really are a partner to the nonprofits as well as a partner to the fund holders here locally. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just jump in here and reinforce that I've been at the front lines of really being able to see the positive impact that the Community Foundation and their donors have made for many, many years in Louisville. And my nonprofit work, I wrote grants for the nonprofit to the Community Foundation, which helps support some amazing programs at the organization that I worked with. So you all do wonderful stuff. You make it very friendly and accessible for a broad range of donors to really get engaged in the community to create positive impact. So,
well, we appreciate that. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And that's been a very intentional step on our part. Community foundations as a whole have historically been really great transactional partners to our donors. We've gotten really good at processing gifts and processing grants, and there are community foundations all over the country, in fact all over the world, and about 10 or 15 years ago, institutions around the country started to look more critically at the role that they could play in how we partner with our fund holders, with our donors. And rather than just being that transactional partner, we wanted to help those that were interested in really being more transformational in their giving and in their charitable giving. And so that's really the role that I'm trying to build here at the Community Foundation. We have always done this work, but we've done it in sort of an ad hoc, responsive kind of way. And so we're trying to be more intentional about how we reach out to our fund holders and work strategically with the ones that are interested in sort of thinking big about how they want to, quote unquote, do philanthropy.
Yeah, that's great. Your intention helps them be more intentional.
That's the hope. Yes.
Yeah, right. So then tell us from there a little bit more about your specific work at the
Sure,
Community
sure.
Foundation.
So I'm going to take a step back and give you a little bit of background about myself, just
Great.
because it is sort of my personal journey has felt a little bit circuitous, but I actually think that whether or not it's been intentional, where I am now is sort of a natural coalescing of the jobs and roles that I've had before. As you mentioned, my background's in nonprofit fund development, and I worked for a long time for causes and political candidates that I cared about deeply, and worked on the fundraising side of that. And I went back to school to get a master's degree in social work, and I focused on organizational and community development, really looking at what made systems healthy, and whether that system was a family system, a community system, or an organizational system. I really was interested in figuring out how and why things worked well. When I started at the foundation, I actually started on the mission and impact team, which is the team that focuses on managing our competitive grant programs and special initiatives. But I ended up being pulled into some strategic donor relationships because I had that experience of working with major donors. And it was out of those early relationships that we as an organization started to think really critically about the role that we were playing in our fundholders' lives, and helping them with their charitable giving. And so my role as the director of philanthropy has really evolved from that early work. Like I mentioned, we were working with a handful of donors who had come to us, really, quite frankly, donors who had wealth that would have allowed them to have their own family foundations, but they chose to partner with the foundation for a number of reasons. But they were interested in sort of a higher level of touch and support. And what we realized is that our fund holders don't lack for ideas, right? They just, to a certain degree, are limited by capacity and by other types of resources. And so they were looking to us to sort of step in and sort of give them the thumbs up and say, we can make this happen. Let us be your partner. Let's dream big about what this could look like. So that's the work that I've been doing. And like I said, it's not any work that we weren't doing already. It's not a new suite of services for us, but we're just trying to do it in a more intentional and focused way.
Great. So you mentioned some of your background there that led you up to where you're at now with this job and this work, this version of the work. Would you like to share anything else about what drew you to this work?
Yeah, it's funny. I tell this story all the time. My mom is a clinical social worker, so she works with families, and she's retired, but she works with families and individuals and couples for a really long time. And when I went back to get my master's, people said, "Oh, you're going to do what your mom does," and I said, "No, no, 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 no. Like I'm really interested in sort of more of the systems and community level work." And what's so interesting is that whether or not I intended it, whether or not I realized it, my work really is sort of like family therapy, and I couldn't have anticipated that. But it is, having conversations about money is hard. It is a for a lot of people, it is a loaded topic, and we aren't aware, myself included, often aren't aware of the baggage that we bring to conversations about money. Also, it's not just about money. Philanthropy is so much about values, and those two things are complex. And so I feel so grateful and honored that I am able to be to sit with families, to sit with companies that are thinking strategically about this work, and to really sort of help them, really just to provide them with the tools and the resources that they need to get to some of these decisions on their own.
Fantastic. So do you have an example of that you'd like to share?
Sure. I mean, I have a couple of examples. I'll try to sort of diversify this. One individual in particular comes to mind. She is a single woman. She received an inheritance from her parents at their passing, and she knew immediately that she wanted to use this inheritance, or at least a portion of it, for charitable giving. And so she reached out to us, and this is coming on the heels of the death of her father, so that in and of itself is a very emotional issue, and she is managing the sort of complex relationship that she had with her father, and sort of laying over that the messages that she received growing up about what her responsibility was, what the sort of family's role was, the role that they played in the community. And so it wasn't just her, it wasn't just sort of her values, it was laid over with the family's values and the shoulds and oughts that come along with those relationships. And so we sat down over the course of 3 or 4 months, and in this instance in particular, it's been a really iterative process, and it's been 3 or 4 conversations really sort of helping her drill down on, or I should say balance the things that matter to her with the things that she feels like she needs to care about because of who her parents were.
Yes.
So we, to be totally honest, we haven't come down to a specific mission statement yet, but we are getting, every conversation we have, we get closer and closer. And I think, she's a year into this now, and she's getting clearer on the types of funding opportunities that really resonate with her. And when something speaks to her, she's been really great at saying, this is exactly what I'm interested in. And that provides me with the feedback so that I can get closer and closer on, not taking opportunities to her that don't align at all with what she's interested in. So that's one example that's been a little bit more iterative than maybe some of the other experiences that I have.
Yes. It can be such a process though, and I have found that it usually is a process that people live by their values for the most part, but they don't do that usually a lot of times it's not very conscious. And they bring that into this, like you're saying, a very complicated emotional situation where they've inherited. It's so interesting, and because I know I do the work on the investment side for this kind of client for sure. So it's experiencing that sudden money situation, the mixed emotions, the relationship challenges, and the love that all you feel as you have received this gift and opportunity, but also it can be so it can feel so challenging to that inheritor.
Yeah.
And just like you said, and then to help her, this is so valuable what you're saying, to help her then move through this process so that when she does take action to give and use the money as the good steward that she wants to be with this money, it just seems like she's going to feel so great about it rather than question it and worry that if she did the right thing and all of that. You're just going to help her really create the impact and leave the continuing legacy that she now wants to leave, and something that also feels like it honors her parents.
Absolutely.
So that's just powerful. That's great.
It's good. It's great work.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so my next question was just linked to what we're already talking about here, which is, have you worked with donors to help them create a mission statement or a guiding statement for their philanthropy? So you've given us a fantastic example of one way that that's unfolding, and you're helping a donor evolve that, unfold it, get more clear about it. Could you give us another example of what it can look like?
Sure. Well, I think I'm gonna take a step back from a specific example and talk a little bit about how what the sort of big picture goals are, and I think that what we're really trying to do is to help families, individuals, couples, or corporate partners move from these high level abstract ideas about values and about sort of what it means to do good, to the very specific and tactical work of grant making. And how do we, so we have this idea, what does that mean from a practical perspective? And so I'd love to share a couple of the tools that we use that really sort of help us walk a fund holder through that process. And I really like to start, well, I'll start by saying, we really take a customized approach to working with each fund holder. And it's kind of a classic social work statement to meet the client where they are. But each client, each fund holder comes to us at a really different point in their philanthropic journey. Some come to us already with a very sophisticated approach to their philanthropy, whether it's because they're, third or fourth generation of a family coming from a family of wealth, or they may be brand new and in their head it's they think about a philanthropist as someone like, the Rockefellers, and it can't be anybody but that. And so we try to meet the donor wherever they are in that process and try to take a really a customized approach to the work with them. That said, I almost always start, regardless of where the fund holder is on this in their journey on this spectrum, I always start with some really high level questions, because to me, I think it just sort of primes the pump for them to start thinking about philanthropy and about charitable giving. So a couple of those questions that I always love to come back to are, why is giving important? Something as simple as that. What motivates you to give? That's a great one, because people are often really motivated by different things. If you're talking to a family or a couple, that's one of those questions that can right off the bat, you can have really sort of competing or conflicting perspectives on what their motivation is. What are the values that inform your giving? And one that I really love, particularly when working with families, either small families or families with multiple generations involved, is how have personal life events influenced your giving? One of the things that I think we're realizing more and more now, we're trying to build some expertise around this, is how the different generations approach philanthropy and what motivates them. And if you have, baby boomers who are helping their children and their grandchildren navigate these conversations, they may be really different motivations. There's certainly going to be different life events that influenced it. You talk to millennials and they don't know life without September 11th as a lens. Whereas, my mom, the baby boomer generation, was influenced by, their parents coming back from war. So all of those things really can influence people's approach to giving, whether or not they realize it. So I like to sort of prime the pump with some high level questions. And then whether it's in a same meeting or in a follow-up meeting, I like to do an activity that is called money messages. I didn't create that. It's a lot of folks, you included, Carrie, probably use a similar tool, but it really is to help people to start thinking about the messages that have informed their assumptions about money and wealth. We all have them. Most of us, myself included, aren't necessarily aware of how they influence our behavior and our thinking. And so really sort of walking folks through an exercise that gets them thinking about what that looks like. I typically start with the question of, what is a money message that you may have received growing up? And, for example, a classic one, money doesn't grow on trees. I think a lot of people heard that. Another one, be grateful for what you have. This notion of, I think a lot of people, when they think about their old money messages, they're messages of scarcity as opposed to abundance. And so at least that's what they carry with them. And then the next piece of the activity is having people write down, if they, starting today, could create a new money message that they could share with their kids or their partners or their friends, what would that be? And it's a really, really empowering experience for people to think, I can start over. If what I learned wasn't good or wasn't right, I can start over now. And the money messages activity combined with the values questions, I think all of a sudden people are open in a different kind of way to really drilling down on the things that matter to them, or at least starting to do that.
Yes, starting. So those are fantastic tools. It sounds like both of those, the the 5 questions. Is that what it was? The first 5 questions you shared with us, and then the money messages process. And it just seemed like even with each of those 5 questions that, like you said, it's such a high level question that I'm guessing you really then help guide them through unpacking that question for themselves.
Absolutely.
Because it could be a lot. And if they've not really done any work yet to understand the answer for themselves to a question like personal life events that affect your relationship with money, seems like a lot. And especially like you said, if it's one thing if it's an individual, and then you may have a couple, and then you may have a family of multi-generations. So wow, I mean, a lot of work, but I actually am getting juiced by just thinking about that. That's exciting that you are able to help families and individuals and couples really do that work. Do you want to add anything there about your process at all with someone, how it has looked to help them unpack some of those questions?
Sure. I have another example is a family that since I used an example of an individual before, I'll use an example of a family, and you could just imagine the complexity. This is a family that generation one, they were very successful in creating a family business, and both mom and dad have passed on. And generation two, there are 10 siblings, and you can imagine the complexity. It's already complex, but when you add 10 different personalities and different sets of values, it is literally exponential in terms of the level of complexity. But they had been, as a family, had been successfully managing their family's philanthropic fund here at the Community Foundation for 25 plus years. And it was, the parents created the fund with the intention of Gen 2 and Gen 3 managing it. And when they created it 20 plus years ago, they were hands off. So it's really been Generation 2's responsibility. And when mom and dad passed away, nothing really changed except for everything changed, and that the family was suddenly looking at the sort of understanding the responsibility and the weight that they carried with managing this fund, that the fund was suddenly about their parents' legacy. And that is heavy and big in a way when your parents are deceased than it is in a way when your parents are still alive. And so I think they realized that the sort of weight of what they were being charged to do, and suddenly sort of, sat up a little straighter and started to think more strategically about how they should manage the fund. And so they reached out to me, to a colleague of mine, and then my colleague connected me. And we have been meeting once a quarter for the past year. And that has been really about, and I digress, because you asked about mission statements, and really what I'm telling you is sort of like the story of how you get to a mission statement. But
Okay.
they felt that it was really necessary to sort of get the house in order before they could really focus in on what their mission statement, what they wanted it to be. And they have up until now not yet engaged the third generation, but we have built a process whereby they will be engaging the third generation. And then once they bring on Gen 3, that's when they really want to take a critical look at the work that they'll be doing as a family and what that mission statement is. At the end of the day, the examples of great mission statements, it really is about who we are, what do we value, and how can we get there. And I say it's as simple as that, but this I think is one of those instances where the journey is as important as the destination. And that I really fundamentally believe that the families and individuals that I've worked with, not to underplay the importance of that guiding statement, because that is critical, but it is also so much about the journey of getting there.
Yes. And so I'm guessing that age ranges for this second generation, the first generation, were they more
in their 90s? And so
okay.
Second generation is, I'm calling it
baby boomers.
Yes, baby boomers.
Aged.
Yes, 55 to 75 sort of
Okay.
range. And Gen 3 is I think from, I would say middle school up through young professional age.
Yes. Okay. How wonderful. Okay. And complicated and
Yes,
challenging,
exactly.
I'm sure, but such important work to help them move through that. So with that, what have you found can be challenging? You've touched on this a little bit, but more specifically, what have you found to be challenging for people or couples or families during the process of getting to that guiding statement?
I think, well, I mentioned just the sort of emotional nature of the work, and it is, you have to sort of lean into the vulnerability, you have to lean into the complexity, and I think that can be hard for a lot of people. I also am always sort of fascinated by that there is concern among sometimes with the generation that creates the fund. There is this anxiety and concern around whether or not the subsequent generations will really care about the same things that Gen 1 cares about, whether they will be, it's less about whether or not they'll be good stewards of the dollars, but whether or not the values when you're two generations removed will still be reflective of the original of the donor's values. And I that's a hard, it's not about trust, but it's just about for the donors that are creating the funds, they care so deeply about the things that they care about, and they're worried that when they're no longer here, that there may not be a voice for their interests or their sort of vision, and that gets to a pretty important question when you were coming up with the mission statement about how specific or how broad do you want it to be. Because if you as an individual can acknowledge that times change, and we may have solved the issue of homelessness 2 generations from now, and you want to trust that your grandchildren will be addressing other issues like the environment or other things, then I think it behooves the family to create a statement that is broader and more with the emphasis more on the values as opposed to on the specific outcome or the specific organizations. And so an example of that might be, I tried to pull together a few mission statements that I thought would be helpful as a part of this conversation. So one example is just sort of summarizing: our family values dignity, equality, and opportunity, and we believe that the opportunity for a good education is critical to a family's success. So that's a pretty broad. It has the values that the family has aligned around. It identifies education specifically as the way that those values sort of manifest, but it doesn't say we want to support schools. It doesn't say we want to support daycares. It's not that prescriptive. It leaves open the sort of what next. And I think that's a really that's I think a great approach for some families that acknowledge that we don't know what the challenge is going to be 2 generations from now, but we're going to trust that through this lens of the values that we've identified, we're going to trust that the next generations are going to be able to do what they think is right. So I think that I keep coming back to trust. I don't think it's fundamentally about trust, but I think it's just a question of whether there's comfort in the sort of process and in what you've established this, and you've entrusted this fund to your children and grandchildren. So can you trust that that they are going to sort of be able to do work that you feel is representative of your values? So
Yes, and it seems like they also, as far as trust, they trust the organization that they've chosen to be the holders of the donation. So in your case, the Community Foundation of Louisville, they trust that you all will be there during these processes for decades,
Absolutely. Yeah.
to help this, because left to our own devices, we, whether it's a couple who go through challenges, you seek a therapist because
Yeah.
that outside third party can help you move through the most challenging of situations. And I know with me, when I work with a couple, around money and their investing, same thing, that objective third party that I am with them, it can really help them for the first time ever in some cases move through some of very challenging differences that they have in their money personalities, like you said, in differing values, to find common ground and all of that. So it very much sounds like what your work is, and then the Community Foundation in the bigger picture to really serve such an important role in those kinds of situations with donors.
Yeah, I think, and I don't mean to come back to, I think you're right. I think it's, I don't want it to imply that it's about trust in the family, but I think it's about trust in the process. And I think to your point, you can't have trust in the process if you don't trust the facilitator or the organization that's sort of hosting.
Yes.
So I think that
the keeper of the process.
Keeper of the process. Yes.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I should put that on my business card. The keeper of the process. Right.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Okay. So philanthropy and investing, you sit very rooted or grounded in the philanthropy part of our money life, and I sit very rooted in the investing part of our money life. And for those of you who have seen it, I've got a wheel that shows the different areas of your money life, and I talk about how you can bring values to those different areas. And one of those really key areas is philanthropy, whether it's you have $5 extra that you want to donate somewhere, or you have 500 or 5,000 or 5 million, or whatever that number is. It's all under that. It's all in that area of your money life, philanthropy. And then the investing part, or pedal on my wheel, of your money life. I get really excited about how these two areas, philanthropy and investing. I talked with your colleague Tricia about this in part one of my Community Foundation of Louisville interviews, and how these two complement each other, because philanthropy and investing really are two areas where having those guiding statements, or understanding what your values are and how you want those to be reflected in your money life, can do amazing things with these two areas. And in some ways, I see these as two of the most powerful areas that we can really express our values and create positive impact through philanthropy and investing. And so I want to circle around. I don't think we've talked about this, Anne, but I have my master's in social work.
No way.
Yes. And also focused on macro social work, not the clinical therapy. I didn't go in like you and think I wanted to do clinical therapy, though in my younger days I thought that was the direction I was heading. But the more I uncovered, I realized I was really excited about this macro focus of community building, and mine also was nonprofit leadership at that time, but also really, like you said, changing systems. So helping the beauty of the beauty and power for me of social work is you touched on this, which is social work is really about helping support people in their very individual personal life experiences, while also working to create change in the structures that impact them and their life. And so I have ended up in the work that I do feeling very much like that's what I'm doing. When I work with people in their money life, it's so personal, and it's really important to understand what the purpose of this money needs to be in their personal money life to create the life they envision and impact their loved ones. And then also at the same time, through their investing and other areas of their money life, how their values are reflected, so that hopefully they're creating more positive impact in the bigger world through, for example, impact investing, socially responsive investing. So I just hear what you're saying about your work in philanthropy very much being similar, yet
Absolutely.
rooted in the philanthropy part of that. So does that bring up anything for you? Anything you want to share there? Any
No, I think
thoughts?
you're exactly right. I mean, I think we are seeing more and more folks that are I think people know or have known that philanthropy, if you were to sort of ask them to distill philanthropy, you would get some version of doing good or filling a need in the community, but I think it would at a fundamental level, people know that it's about values. And I think that makes our work easy in that it's not a shock when we bring up some of these things when we're having conversations with people. But I think more and more, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, more and more people are understanding that their investments can also be a reflection of their values, and what that means. That's something that we're seeing and hearing more and more about these days, whether it's impact investing, and I know that term has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people, but are you seeing that in your work in terms of more and more people sort of getting this link between values and investing?
Totally. And the data is there that shows it's just exponentially growing. The interest, women and millennials are really leading the way in the
Absolutely. Yeah.
interest. I would have to say as a Gen Xer that I think Gen Xers are right in there too. But
Yeah.
yes, the research has shown that there's a deep interest there. And the big players in the investing world, I would be shocked if at this point any of the big names in the investing world were not offering something now on their menu of investment choices that in some way was a socially screened investment, an impact investment. It's still hard to find the deeper impact firms like natural investments, but yeah, we see it growing, and it's really great to see, and we feel the shift for sure.
That's great.
Yeah, so one of the things I've seen though in this conversation around philanthropy and investing is that I think from very early as children, we are exposed to giving. We are exposed to giving to others, and in our money experiences, in even very formative early money experiences, I would say it's very normal for children to experience watching others give and then having the opportunity to give themselves.
Absolutely.
Was it UNICEF? I remember even, in like early days of grade school having this little milk carton thing. You were probably way younger than that.
No,
So they might have
know what you're talking about.
okay. Yeah. And it was about, donations to help children in other countries that very much needed it, that support. So, I think we're exposed to giving, and that feels very familiar, and we get that idea pretty quickly. And so, of course, our values, for the most part, for most people, of course, values would be reflected in giving. I think so. I see that more people enter the money and values conversation through their giving life. And then they may enter it through their buying life, what they're buying, where they get their food. Is it fair trade? Does it involve child slave labor? Does it, all of those things? I think more and more people have gotten aware of that, and they've brought it in, their values into that piece of their money life. And now also, yes, more and more people are getting into realizing and recognizing the importance of not having a siloed approach to values in their money life, but also recognizing the importance and the power of now bringing their values into their investment life as well.
Absolutely. No doubt.
Yes. Yeah. So with that, I think that's a good segue into one of my last questions for you, which is now that you've been doing this amazing work with donors and just the background that you bring, your personality, your professional experience, your life experience, how have you brought your values, your intention, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, into your own personal money life?
Yeah.
Or how would you, however you want to frame that, if it's something you've already done or something that's been on your mind, anything there.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I was thinking about that, and how this work has influenced my personal approach to giving. And I realized that, because my professional experience has been limited to the nonprofit world, I realized that for a really long time, like you mentioned, I grew up in a family that where giving was sort of expected. I remember when we were little, my grandfather would give us money for Christmas, and there was the expectation that that part of the money was our Christmas present, but there was an expectation that the other part of the money was to go to a charity of our choice. And I always chose the Humane Society because that's how I rolled as a child. But so it's always been sort of very much embedded in how I approached my life. But I realized that it was emotional and it was haphazard. I was supporting the organizations that sort of caught my interest. And because I was working for nonprofits, I believed fundamentally that my work was a significant contribution to the issues that I cared about, right? Because you don't get into nonprofit work to make a bunch of money. You get into it largely, or I think a lot of people get into it because they care deeply about the issues, and they end up doing that work. But since I've been at the foundation, it's interesting because when I was considering joining the foundation, I remember Susan Berry, our CEO, asked me the question of whether I had concerns about stepping away from the direct work of nonprofits. And, the beauty of working at the foundation is that we get to see the impact of $55 million a year going out into the community to hundreds of nonprofits. But we are at an arm's length from that. And so one of the transition that I've had to make sort of personally as it comes to my philanthropy is really, the decision that I made is really about, I'm trying to think of a way to say this. Basically, I feel strongly about paying for the resources that I use. So, for instance, I think the most tangible example that I can come up with is around free speech and freedom of the press. I care deeply about that issue. I fundamentally believe that if I'm reading the Courier Journal and I'm reading the New York Times and I'm reading local media, that I should pay for that media, that it is an honor to have it. It is a resource in our community that I feel is quite frankly critically important to democracy if we're talking big picture. So that's another example. I live between two of our parks, and I think our park systems are one of this community's most valuable assets, and I am in those parks daily, and so I believe that I should sort of that I have a responsibility to support the resources in this community that I take advantage of. And of course there are others that tug at my heartstrings that I support, and happily so, but I think the value that has come up as I've done this work and gotten closer to it and put a little bit more thought into it is about really believing that I care about these things and I care enough about them to support them, because not everyone that uses them can or does. And so I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And to me, it gets back to how I currently do this with clients, which may evolve. I'm sure to evolve in the future, but how I start the conversation around values with new clients is really, we're not trying to reach out to something that is outside of you. It's what you're already doing. And what I hear you say is you looked at, what am I already doing that is expressing my values, and how can I put my money there?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. You said it so much better than I did.
So, and something else you brought up, this idea of reactive. And really that to me is exactly the point that we're talking about, which is it is very easy, whether we're spending our money, what we're buying with our money, or how we're, I'd say particularly what we're buying with our money and how we're giving with our money. We can do these in very reactive ways. And you spoke to that a little bit, that I have found people, including myself, can give in a really unconscious, reactive way, and then not feel the power of giving in the same way. So what you're doing, really helping people get clear about what that guiding statement is, or those guiding values are, it takes it from a reactive process, a haphazard process is what you said there, to really having the power of clear intention and focus.
Yep. It's no, I think you're exactly right. And it doesn't mean that it has to be perfect, and it doesn't mean that it has to be the answer every time, but it brings an intentionality and sort of a focus. It's like holding up a mirror every time you're thinking about doing something and saying, does this reflect, is this reflective of me? Is it reflective of the legacy I want to leave? Is it reflective of my values and what I say that I hold close? And if the answer is no, you just really want to support the Humane Society, that's fine, but at least you've made that decision, and you've not just doing it passively.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I bet it is reflective, like you. It's Humane Society is reflective of you and who you are and what matters most to you. Right. That's the thing. What matters most to you. And there are a lot of things that matter, and a lot of things that matter to me or you. But what matters most? Because even I always use Oprah as an example. We think of Oprah with unlimited financial resources, right? And even Oprah, I bet, has a guiding statement or some kind of guide to her philanthropic decisions. Mm-hmm. What matters most to her? And we know that, like with the school that she opened in Africa. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So one last thing I'd like to circle back around to this gift from your grandfather.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember how the expectations were set with the gift?
I mean, it was, my grandfather was such a generous soul, and it really was, he got so much joy from giving, and he wanted to pass that on to us. And I think that was always a part of the message, that it's fun to be generous, and it's fun to have the flexibility, and to make it a requirement of the gift, I think was so wonderful, because it gets you in the practice. It lets you know the joy that comes with being charitable, and for a 7-year-old or whatever who didn't save her allowance, he was able to reinforce, to build the foundation early and to reinforce that message from an early point, which was really great. I give him honestly some credit in terms of where I've ended up, but it was a wonderful thing.
And do you remember? Can you remember the specifics of, did he give you a very specific guide on a third of this or a half of this?
I think it was only 10%, but it was the rest is yours, and then but 10% has to go to charity. But I'd have to ask my sisters, because I could be wrong about that.
That's the typical tithing percent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, Anne, thank you so much for your time today.
This was a delight. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you.
Yes, fantastic work that you're doing.
Thank
fantastic
you.
Work that the Community Foundation
does.
And thank you so much.